The first time humans met aliens, it did not happen in fire and war. It happened over a cup of something like tea, in a small room on a space station near Neptune. Two officers from Earth sat across from three tall blue-skinned beings, with narrow eyes and calm voices. The aliens called themselves the Cygnians, and they came from a group of star systems they called the Assembly. That day, the Cygnians smiled with their thin lips and said humans were an interesting young species. They did not mean it as a compliment. They meant it the way an adult might describe a child who had just learned to walk. That was 22 years ago. Since then, humanity had learned a hard lesson. Being called interesting by the Assembly was not a good thing. It was a polite way of saying primitive. The Assembly was old, older than humans could easily understand. Some of its member species had been flying between stars since before humans had learned to write. They had fusion engines that never failed, weapons that could crack a moon in half, and ships so large they cast shadows on planets below them. Next to all of that, Earth's fleet looked like toys. Human ships were slower. Human weapons were weaker. Human shields could stop a handful of hits before failing completely. The Assembly knew all of this, because they had been watching Earth for a long time before they ever said hello. At first, the Assembly was polite. They sent trade ships. They offered maps of empty star systems that had no value to them but might be useful to Earth. They allowed a small number of human scientists to visit one of their orbital libraries, where knowledge older than human civilization sat stored in crystal drives. Earth's leaders were grateful. Many people on Earth believed this was the start of a new golden age, where humanity would grow and learn from wiser neighbors. But not everyone on Earth was so trusting. A quiet number of scientists, generals, and engineers looked at the numbers and saw a different picture. The Assembly gave Earth just enough technology to be useful as a trading partner, but never enough to be a threat. Every gift came with limits. Every deal favored the Assembly, and every time Earth asked to buy real warship technology, weapons that matched the Assembly's own ships, the answer was the same, wrapped in soft words: "Your species is not ready yet." Admiral Elena Reyes had heard that sentence more times than she could count. She had heard it in council meetings, in trade summits, and once, years ago, from a Cygnian ambassador who said it to her face while smiling. She had been a young captain then, proud of her ship and her crew. She remembered walking out of that meeting with her jaw tight and her hands in fists. She had promised herself that one day, that smile would be gone. She remembered, too, a quiet conversation she once had with her own mentor, an old admiral named Grace Whitfield, who had since passed away. Grace had told her something Elena never forgot. "They will keep telling you that you are not ready, for as long as it benefits them to say it. The only answer to that kind of sentence is to stop asking for permission and simply become ready." Elena had carried those words with her for over 20 years, through every meeting, every setback, and every quiet moment of doubt. Now Elena was 51 years old, and she commanded the entire United Earth Defense Fleet. Her hair had gone gray at the sides, and there were lines on her face that had not been there when she was young. But the fire that had been lit in her all those years ago had never gone out. It had only grown quieter and more patient. For the last 8 years, Elena had been running a secret project. Very few people knew its true size. The people of Earth knew it only by a small, boring name: Project Ember. Most assumed it was a research program, testing new fuel systems or communication arrays. In truth, Project Ember was the largest and most expensive military project in human history. It was being built in pieces, across a dozen shipyards scattered through the solar system, so that no single Assembly scout ship could see the whole picture. Even the workers who built it did not know what they were building. Only a small circle of engineers, and Elena herself, understood the full plan. The ship being built under Project Ember had a name too, though it was not public. Its designers called it the Prometheus. The idea for the Prometheus had come from a disaster. 9 years ago, a small fleet of Assembly pirates, breakaway ships that no longer followed Assembly law, had attacked a human mining colony near Saturn. The colony had almost no defenses. 3 Earth warships had answered the distress call, but they arrived too late to save the colony, and too weak to punish the attackers. The pirates destroyed one Earth ship, badly damaged another, and then flew away laughing over an open comm channel, mocking the humans for daring to fight back with what one pirate called toy boats. That day, 43 humans died on the mining colony, and another 61 died on the destroyed warship. Elena had been in command of the response fleet. She had watched the battle from a command ship 2 hours away, too far to help, listening to the screams over the radio and unable to do anything but order a retreat. She had returned home that night, sat alone in her quarters, and made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. Earth needed a ship, not just stronger than the pirates, but stronger than anything the assembly itself could build. A ship that could stand alone against an entire enemy fleet and win. Building that ship was not easy. Human engineers did not have assembly technology to copy. They had to invent their own answers to problems the assembly had solved centuries ago. It took years of failures. 3 early reactor designs blew up during testing, killing 11 engineers in one accident alone. A new kind of hull material, meant to be lighter and stronger than the assembly's own plating, cracked under stress tests again and again before a young materials scientist named Amara Osei finally found the right combination of layered alloys and woven carbon lattice. Dr. Amara Osei was, in many ways, the true heart of Project Ember. She had grown up in Lagos, the daughter of 2 engineers, and had shown a gift for materials science before she was even a teenager. By the time she turned 30, she was already known as one of the best minds in her field. When Elena first approached her about Project Ember, Amara had one question: can we actually win? Elena had answered honestly, I don't know, but I know we'll lose for certain if we never try. Amara had joined the project that same week. Over the following years, Amara built a small team of the sharpest engineers Earth had to offer, pulled quietly from a dozen countries and sworn to secrecy. Together, they designed something the assembly had never seen before, a new kind of power core, built not to copy alien technology, but to solve the same problem in a completely different way. The assembly's ships ran on stable, well-understood fusion reactors, refined over centuries. Amara's team took a riskier path. They built a reactor that pulled energy from tightly controlled bursts of contained plasma, cycling at speeds that should have torn the containment field apart. On paper, it looked impossible. In practice, after 3 failed prototypes and 1 very expensive explosion, it worked. They called it the Helios core, and it produced more raw power than anything humanity had built before, more even than most ships in the assembly fleet. With that much power available, the ship's other systems could be pushed further than anyone had dared to try. The weapons team, led by a quiet, serious engineer named Rajiv Patel, built massive rail-driven cannons that used the Helios core's output to fire solid projectiles at speeds that made shields almost meaningless. Where the assembly's beam weapons burned through shields slowly, wearing them down layer by layer, Rajiv's railguns hit like a hammer, all their force landing in a single instant. The shield team took a different approach as well. Instead of one large shield bubble like assembly ships used, they built a layered system of smaller, overlapping shield plates across the hull, each one able to fail on its own without bringing down the whole defense. If one section failed, the others could still protect the ship. It was more complex to build and harder to maintain, but it meant the Prometheus could take a beating that would destroy any single shield assembly ship many times over. All of this had been designed, tested, and slowly assembled over 8 long years, hidden inside a giant construction dock built deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the outer solar system. The dock had its own name too, though almost no one used it: Forge Station. From the outside, Forge Station looked like a quiet, unremarkable mining operation, one of hundreds scattered through the belt. Assembly scout ships that passed nearby saw nothing worth reporting. That had been the entire point. Now, after 8 years, the Prometheus was almost ready. Elena stood in the command gallery above the construction dock, looking down through thick reinforced glass at the ship that had eaten so much of her life. Even unfinished, with sections of the hull still open to show the machinery inside, it was an incredible sight. The Prometheus stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its dark gray hull broken by rows of railgun turrets and thick armored plating. Compared to the sleek, elegant ships of the assembly, it looked rough and heavy, almost brutal. Elena thought that was fitting. It was not built to be beautiful. It was built to win. Beside her stood Captain Marcus Cade, the man chosen to command the Prometheus once it launched. Marcus was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with a calm, steady manner that had served him well through 20 years in the fleet. He had lost his younger brother in the same pirate attack that had convinced Elena to start Project Ember. Marcus never spoke about it much, but everyone who worked closely with him knew that quiet fire lived in him too. 3 more weeks, Marcus said, looking down at the ship. Then she's combat ready. 3 weeks, Elena repeated. And then we still have to keep her hidden until the right moment. You think the Assembly suspects anything? Elena was quiet for a moment. I think the Assembly believes we are exactly what they've always believed. Primitive, slow, no real threat. That belief is the only advantage we have left. Marcus nodded slowly. He knew as well as she did that this advantage would not last forever. Somewhere out among the stars, the Assembly Council was still debating what to do about humanity. Reports from Earth's small diplomatic corps, and from a few sympathetic traders within the Assembly itself, all pointed to the same growing problem. The Assembly's patience with Earth was running low. Some voices within the Council argued that humans were growing too curious, too independent, asking for technology and freedoms that primitive species were not supposed to want. Other, harsher voices argued for something far more direct: restriction, quarantine, or worse. None of this reached the public back on Earth. To most people going about their daily lives, the Assembly still seemed like a distant, mostly friendly presence, offering trade deals and slow, careful cooperation. Only a small circle of leaders understood how close that friendly mask was to slipping. 3 days after Elena's visit to Forge Station, that mask slipped for the first time in public. An Assembly diplomatic ship, the kind normally used for peaceful negotiations, appeared without warning near Mars, escorted by 4 heavily armed Assembly warships. It was a larger show of force than anything the Assembly had brought to Earth's territory before. The diplomat aboard, an older Cygnian named Ambassador Threl Vasca, requested an emergency meeting with Earth's government. He did not explain why so many warships were needed for a simple conversation. Elena was in the room when the meeting took place, sitting quietly near the back beside Earth's Secretary of Defense, while Ambassador Vasca spoke through a translator to a room full of tense human officials. Vasca's tone was calm, almost gentle, the way it always was, but his words were not gentle at all. He explained, patiently, as if speaking to children, that the Assembly Council had grown concerned about humanity's instability. He mentioned Earth's continued military spending, its refusal to fully open its shipyards to Assembly inspection, and what he called reckless independent research programs that violated the spirit, if not the letter, of their trade agreements. He did not say the words Project Ember out loud. He did not need to. The way his eyes moved briefly toward Elena told her everything. Ambassador Vasca finished by saying that the Council had decided Earth needed closer guidance going forward. A permanent Assembly oversight fleet would be stationed near Earth's solar system to ensure that humanity's growth remained responsible. Any human military activity, beyond an approved limit, would be treated as a violation of the peace agreement, one that the Assembly reserved the right to respond to with force. The room went silent after the translator finished. Elena felt her pulse pounding in her ears. She understood exactly what this meant. It was not oversight. It was a leash, and the Assembly intended to put it around Earth's neck before humanity ever had a chance to grow strong enough to resist. Earth's Secretary of Defense, a tired-looking man named Diego Alvarez, asked carefully what would happen if Earth refused this arrangement. Ambassador Vasca's smile did not change at all. He said simply that refusal would be seen as an act of hostility, and that the Assembly hoped humanity was wise enough not to make that mistake. Then he stood, bowed his head slightly in a gesture that looked almost respectful, and left the room, his warships still sitting quietly in orbit above Mars as a silent reminder of what backed up his words. That night, Elena called an emergency meeting with her closest advisors and with Marcus and Amara, connected by secure link from Forge Station. She laid out everything that had happened, word for word. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. "They know something," Amara said finally. "Maybe not everything, but something." "They know enough to be worried," Elena agreed, "which means our timeline just changed." Marcus leaned forward, his jaw tight. 3 weeks is what the engineers gave us for full combat readiness. Can we move faster?" Amara hesitated, running numbers in her head that only she fully understood. 10 days. Maybe 9. if we push the reactor calibration and skip some of the secondary weapon tests. It's risky. We'd be taking her out with systems that haven't been fully proven. And if we wait the full 3 weeks? Elena asked. Then we might not get the chance to launch her at all, Marcus said quietly. Not if that assembly fleet decides to move first. Elena looked around the room at the tired, determined faces of the people who had given years of their lives to this project. She thought about the mining colony near Saturn, the 61 dead crew members on that destroyed warship, and the smiling ambassador who had just tried to put a leash around her entire species. She thought about every meeting where the words, "not ready yet," had been used, like a wall, to keep humanity small and obedient. 9 days, Elena said. We move in 9 days. No one argued. Over the following 9 days, Forge Station worked around the clock. Engineers who had already been pushing themselves for years found new reserves of energy, driven by the knowledge that the ship they were building might be the only thing standing between Earth and a future of quiet, permanent obedience. Amara barely slept, moving between the reactor core and the weapons bay, checking numbers again and again, terrified of missing some small flaw that could cost lives later. Marcus spent long hours walking the still unfinished corridors of the Prometheus with his soon-to-be crew, learning every twist and turn of the massive ship, preparing them as best he could for a battle none of them could fully predict. Meanwhile, above Earth, the situation grew tenser by the day. The Assembly Oversight Fleet Ambassador Vasca had promised began to arrive in small groups, sleek warships taking up quiet positions near the edges of the solar system, watching, waiting, saying little. Earth's government, still mostly unaware of Project Ember, scrambled to respond diplomatically, sending careful messages asking for more time, more discussion, hoping to delay whatever the Assembly was planning, without giving away that anything unusual was happening in the outer belt. On the 9th day, with the Helios core running for the first time at full, uninterrupted power, and the last of the railgun turrets locked into place, Elena stood once more in the command gallery above Forge Station, looking down at the finished Prometheus. It was no longer an unfinished shape wrapped in scaffolding. It was whole now, dark and massive, its hull plating gleaming faintly under the dock lights, its weapon turrets sitting ready and silent, waiting. Marcus stood beside her, already dressed in his command uniform, ready to board. "She's beautiful," he said quietly, and for once there was no irony in his voice at all. "She's ours," Elena answered, "built by human hands, from human minds, without a single stolen piece of assembly technology. Whatever happens next, remember that. No matter what they call us, remember what we built." Before he stepped into the boarding tube, Marcus paused and looked back at Elena one more time. 8 years ago, you asked me if I wanted a command that might never see combat. Working on a ship most of the fleet didn't even know existed. Everyone told me I was throwing my career away for a project that would probably fail. I never once regretted saying yes. "None of us did," Elena said. "That's the only reason we made it this far." Inside the ship, the crew Marcus had chosen so carefully over the last 2 years were already taking their stations, checking systems one final time before departure. Many of them had given up promising careers on other vessels to join a program they were not even allowed to fully explain to their own families. Some had told loved ones they were being posted to a research station in the outer belt. Others had simply said they could not talk about their new assignment at all. It was a strange, lonely kind of sacrifice, made quietly, without recognition, for years at a stretch. And Marcus understood that whatever happened next, these people deserved far more credit than history would likely ever give them. He walked through the long central corridor toward the bridge, passing engineers running final checks on bulkhead seals, passing young officers reviewing tactical simulations one more time on handheld screens, passing Chief Engineer Yuki Tanaka, running a hand along a section of hull plating, as if reassuring herself, one final time, that the metal beneath her fingers would hold. Everyone he passed nodded to him with the same quiet mixture of nervousness and determination. They all understood, in their own way, exactly what this moment meant. When Marcus finally reached the bridge and settled into the command chair, he allowed himself one last look at the view outside the forward window, at Forge Station, shrinking slowly behind them, as the Prometheus eased free of the docking clamps that had held it in place for the better part of a year. 8 years of secret work, sacrifice, and quiet determination had led to this single moment. Whatever waited for them among the stars ahead, there was no turning back now. With one final nod to Elena's fading image on his comm screen, Marcus turned his attention forward, ready to carry the fate of an entire species into the dark. Far above Earth, unaware of what waited quietly in the outer belt, the assembly fleet continued its patient watch, confident that the primitive humans below them posed no real threat at all. That confidence would not survive the week. The Prometheus left Forge Station in silence. There was no ceremony, no cheering crowd, no speeches broadcast across Earth's networks. Only a small group of engineers standing in the control room, watching on their screens as the massive ship slid slowly out of the hollowed asteroid that had hidden it for 8 years. Amara Osei stood among them, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the ship she had helped build finally move under its own power for the first time. She did not smile. She was too afraid of everything that could still go wrong. Inside the Prometheus, Captain Marcus Cade sat in the command chair on the bridge, watching the same view from the inside. Around him, his crew worked quietly at their stations, checking systems again and again, running the same numbers Amara's team had already checked 100 times. Marcus had chosen his crew carefully over the last 2 years, pulling experienced officers from across the fleet, people he trusted, people who understood exactly what kind of mission they were signing up for, even if most of them did not fully understand what the ship itself could do, until they stepped aboard for the first time. His second-in-command was Commander Lisa Okonkwo, a sharp, no-nonsense officer who had served with Marcus for over a decade. She had been the first person he asked to join the project, and she had said yes before he even finished explaining what Project Ember was. Standing at the tactical station was Lieutenant Commander Tomas Reyes, no relation to Admiral Elena Reyes, a calm young officer with a gift for reading battle patterns quickly under pressure. And running the engineering deck, working directly under remote guidance from Amara herself, was Chief Engineer Yuki Tanaka, a woman who understood the Helios core almost as well as the person who had designed it. All systems green, Yuki reported over the internal comm, her voice steady, despite the obvious tension in it. Helios core stable at 40% output. She's holding. Copy that, Marcus said. Take us to open space, slow and quiet. We are not looking for a fight yet. The Prometheus moved out from behind the asteroid belt at low speed, using a careful path plotted weeks earlier to avoid the known patrol routes of assembly scout ships. For the first 2 days, the plan worked perfectly. The massive ship crept through the outer solar system like a shadow, its systems running at reduced power to keep its energy signature as small as possible. Marcus barely slept during those 2 days, splitting his time between the bridge and short naps in the small officers' quarters just behind it, always ready to be woken the moment anything changed. On the 3rd day, something did change. Captain, I'm picking up an assembly scout ship, Tomas reported from Tactical, his voice tight. Bearing 217, range 800,000 kilometers. Small vessel, unarmed as far as I can tell. Looks like a survey ship, not military. Marcus straightened in his chair. Do they see us? Tomas checked his readings carefully before answering. Hard to say for certain. Our stealth coding is holding, and we're running dark. But at this range, if they run a deep scan in our direction, there's a chance they pick something up. Options? Marcus asked, looking to Lisa. We could change course, add distance, Lisa said. Costs us maybe 6 hours. Marcus thought about it for a moment, weighing the cost of delay against the risk of discovery. 6 hours might not seem like much, but every hour mattered now. Somewhere back on Earth, Elena was fighting a diplomatic battle to buy them time, and every hour, the Prometheus spent hiding, was an hour Elena had to somehow explain away. Hold course, Marcus said finally. Reduce power another 10%. If they don't see us in the next 30 minutes, we keep going as planned. The bridge went quiet as everyone waited. 30 minutes passed slowly, each one feeling far longer than it should have. Finally, Tomas let out a breath. Scout ship is changing course, moving away. I don't think they saw us, Captain. Marcus allowed himself a small nod. Good. Continue on plan. They were not so lucky a second time. 4 days after leaving Forge Station, with the Prometheus now closer to Earth's orbit than it had ever traveled, a different kind of ship appeared on their long-range sensors. This one was not a small, unarmed survey vessel. It was an assembly light cruiser, one of the ships stationed as part of Ambassador Vasca's new oversight fleet, patrolling a wide loop through the outer edge of the solar system. "Captain, this one's different," Tomas said, his voice sharper now. "Military configuration, weapons active, and Captain, I think they're altering course toward us." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Confirm." A tense minute passed as Tomas worked his instruments. "Confirmed. They're changing heading. ETA to visual range, approximately 40 minutes, if they maintain current speed." Lisa looked over from her station. "Orders, Captain?" Marcus thought quickly. This was exactly the situation they had trained for, and yet somehow it still felt different now that it was real. If the assembly cruiser reported the Prometheus's existence back to their fleet before Elena's diplomatic team was ready, the entire plan could collapse. Earth needed more time, but running now, at full speed, would only make the Prometheus even easier to detect, and would almost certainly guarantee they were seen. "Hold course minimum power," Marcus said. "Let's see if they're just running a patrol pattern, or if they're actually onto us." The bridge crew waited in silence as the minutes ticked by. On the main screen, a small blip representing the assembly cruiser slowly grew closer. Marcus watched it with the same tight focus he had once used commanding smaller ships in border patrols years earlier, but this felt heavier. Behind him, somewhere deep in the ship, hundreds of crew members were also waiting, most of them not fully understanding why the ship had suddenly gone so quiet. At the 20-minute mark, the assembly cruiser shifted course again, this time angling away from the Prometheus's position. "They're breaking off," Tomas said, relief clear in his voice. "Looks like a standard patrol loop. I don't think they picked us up." Marcus let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. "Good work, everyone. Stay sharp. We're not out of this yet." They continued on, moving carefully through the last stretch of open space before reaching the more populated inner solar system, where hiding a ship the size of the Prometheus would become far harder. Marcus used the quiet hours to walk the ship, checking on different departments, talking briefly with crew members who were, for many of them, on their very first deployment aboard a completely new and untested vessel. In the weapons bay, he found Rajiv Patel's small engineering team running final calibration checks on the railgun systems, watched closely by Lieutenant Priya Nair, the young weapons officer, who would be responsible for firing them in battle. Priya had trained on simulators for months, but Marcus could see the nervous energy in the way her hands moved slightly faster than necessary, as she checked and rechecked her instruments. "How are they looking?" Marcus asked, stepping into the bay. Priya turned, straightening slightly. "Good, Captain. Better than good, actually. In simulation, a single railgun round from these cannons could punch straight through the shields of an assembly-heavy cruiser, without even slowing down. I still find that hard to believe, honestly." "Believe it," Marcus said. "Dr. Osei's team didn't build these to fight fair. They built them to end fights quickly." Priya nodded, some of the nervous energy in her hands settling slightly. "I hope we don't have to use them, Captain. But if we do, I think we're ready." Marcus offered her a small, reassuring smile before moving on, continuing his walk through the ship. Everywhere he went, he found the same mixture of nervous energy and quiet determination. These were people who understood, in a way most of Earth still did not, exactly how much was riding on this single ship succeeding. Back on Earth, Elena Reyes was fighting her own battle, one fought not with weapons but with words. Ambassador Vasca had requested a second meeting, this time demanding a clear answer on whether Earth would accept the Assembly's proposed oversight arrangement. Elena sat once again near the back of the negotiation room, watching Secretary Alvarez try to buy time with careful, diplomatic language, promising that Earth's leaders needed more time to properly consider such an important decision. Ambassador Vasca's patience, already thin during the first meeting, seemed to be running out entirely. "Secretary Alvarez," he said through the translator, his voice still calm but noticeably colder than before. "The Council has already shown considerable patience with your species. We understand that change is difficult for young civilizations, but patience is not without limits. I must ask you directly, is Earth preparing some manner of independent military response to this arrangement?" The room went very still. Elena kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart was pounding. Secretary Alvarez, to his credit, did not so much as blink. "Ambassador, Earth values the relationship we have built with the Assembly. We are simply asking for the same courtesy, any sovereign people would expect. Time to make an important decision that affects our future. Vasca studied him for a long moment, his narrow eyes unreadable. I hope for your sake, that is the whole truth, he said finally. The Council has authorized me to extend your deadline by exactly 5 more days. After that, the oversight fleet already stationed above your world will begin full deployment, whether Earth has formally agreed or not. He rose from his seat, bowed his head slightly as he always did, and left the room without waiting for a response. 5 days. Elena did the math quickly in her head as she walked briskly out of the meeting room and toward a secure comm station. The Prometheus needed at least 6 more days to reach its final staging position near Earth, close enough to respond quickly if the assembly fleet made a move, but far enough to remain hidden until the right moment. 5 days was not enough time. Something had to give. That night, Elena called Marcus directly, through a heavily encrypted channel, one of the few completely secure lines left between Forge Station's remaining ground team and the ship itself. They've moved the deadline, she told him, her voice tight. 5 days. After that, the oversight fleet deploys fully, whether we like it or not. Marcus was quiet for a moment, running the numbers just as Elena had. We can push harder, cut our margin closer. But Elena, if we rush the final approach, we risk detection long before we're ready to reveal ourselves on our own terms. I know, Elena said. But if the oversight fleet deploys first, they'll be in full combat positions around Earth before you ever arrive. We lose the advantage of surprise entirely. There was a long silence on the line, as both of them considered the impossible choice in front of them. There's another option, Marcus said finally. We don't hide the approach at all. We come in fast, and we make sure they see us exactly the way we want them to see us. Not sneaking in like something to be afraid of. Arriving like something they should have been afraid of all along. Elena considered this carefully. It was a massive risk. If the Prometheus revealed itself too early, before Earth's government and public were prepared for the shock of what it meant, the political fallout could be just as dangerous as any battle. But if it worked, it would send a message far more powerful than any diplomatic argument Secretary Alvarez could make in a meeting room. Do it, Elena said finally. Bring her home, Marcus. Let them see exactly what humanity built while they weren't looking. Over the following 4 days, the Prometheus increased speed steadily, no longer hiding its energy signature, no longer avoiding patrol routes. Marcus wanted the assembly to see them coming. He wanted there to be no confusion, no accident, no chance of a misunderstanding turning into an unplanned battle before Earth was ready. Every hour, as they drew closer to Earth's orbit, more assembly sensors picked up their approach, and the tone of assembly communications, still routed through diplomatic channels, grew increasingly urgent. During those 4 days, Marcus made a point of speaking personally, with as many members of his crew as he could reach, moving through mess halls and maintenance decks during quiet moments between duty shifts. He found Lieutenant Priya Nair in the small officer's mess, late on the second night, staring at a half-finished meal she had clearly forgotten to eat. You should rest while you can, Marcus said, sitting down across from her. Priya looked up, a tired smile crossing her face. I keep running the same numbers over and over, Captain, trying to find every possible way this could go wrong before it actually happens. That's not a bad instinct to have, Marcus said. Just don't let it stop you from sleeping. We're going to need you sharp, not exhausted, when the moment comes. Priya nodded slowly. Can I ask you something, Captain? Do you think we're doing the right thing? Provoking them like this, instead of waiting for Earth's diplomats to keep negotiating? Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. I think we spent over 20 years negotiating politely, and every single time, the answer was the same. Not yet. Not ready. I think there comes a point where continuing to wait quietly stops being patience and starts being surrender. We're not looking for a war, Priya. We're looking to end one that's been happening slowly, one small humiliation at a time, for longer than either of us have been alive. Priya was quiet for a moment, turning the words over. I hope you're right, Captain. So do I, Marcus admitted honestly, and for a moment, the weight of command sat heavily on his shoulders, in a way he rarely allowed anyone else to see. On the 4th day, an emergency transmission reached the Prometheus's bridge directly, translated automatically into clear, simple English by the ship's onboard systems. It was Ambassador Vasca himself, his calm voice now edged with something that sounded almost like genuine alarm. Unidentified human vessel, the transmission began. You are ordered to halt your approach immediately and identify yourself. Your current heading and velocity are considered hostile under existing agreements between Earth and the Assembly Council. Marcus exchanged a brief look with Lisa before responding, keeping his own voice level and calm. Assembly vessel. This is Captain Marcus Cade of the Earth Defense Fleet vessel, Prometheus. We are returning to Earth's orbit, understanding Earth military authority. We have no hostile intentions toward the Assembly at this time. There was a long pause before Vasca's reply came through. Prometheus, this vessel was not registered under any known Earth Defense Fleet designation. Explain its origin immediately. Marcus allowed himself the smallest, faintest smile. Ambassador, the Prometheus is the newest vessel of the Earth Defense Fleet, built entirely by human hands, using human technology. I believe our two peoples are overdue for an updated conversation about what humanity is, and is not, capable of. The silence that followed lasted much longer this time. When Vasca finally responded, his voice had lost all of its usual calm politeness. This vessel will halt immediately and submit to inspection, or it will be considered a direct violation of the peace agreement between our peoples. Ambassador, Marcus said, still calm. The Prometheus will continue on its current course toward Earth's orbit, where it belongs. We are not seeking conflict with the Assembly, but we will not halt, and we will not submit to inspection. I would ask that you relay this message clearly to your council. Earth is not asking for permission to defend itself anymore. The transmission ended abruptly from the other side. On the bridge, the crew sat in tense silence, fully aware of what had just happened. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Whatever came next, there would be no quiet return to the old arrangement, no more polite meetings, where humanity's fate was decided by others, in rooms it was barely allowed into. Well, Lisa said finally, breaking the silence, I suppose there's no turning back now. There never really was, Marcus said quietly, watching the growing blue shape of Earth appear on the main view screen, closer now than it had been in 8 long years of secret work, not since the day they called us primitive, and meant it as an insult. Behind the Prometheus, sensors began picking up new activity across the Assembly's oversight fleet, still stationed at the edges of the solar system. Ships that had been sitting quietly in patrol formation for weeks were now shifting, gathering, forming into what looked unmistakably like a battle formation. Word had clearly reached the Assembly Council quickly, and their response was just as clear. Tomas studied the readings carefully from his tactical station, his expression grim. Captain, I'm counting at least 14 Assembly warships forming up along our projected path to Earth. 2 heavy cruisers, the rest a mix of destroyers and light cruisers. Marcus studied the numbers for a long moment. 14 ships against 1. On paper, even with everything Amara's team had built into the Prometheus, those were not good odds. He thought of the mining colony near Saturn, the 61 crew members who had died on that first destroyed warship, and the smiling ambassador, who had once called humans an interesting young species, meaning it as an insult. Options, Captain? Lisa asked quietly. Marcus looked at the growing formation of assembly ships on the screen, then back at his own crew, steady and ready despite the fear he knew they all felt. We hold course, he said finally. Straight for Earth. Let's find out exactly what this ship and this crew are capable of. Word of the standoff reached Elena within minutes, relayed through the same secure channel that had connected her to Marcus throughout the entire mission. She stood alone in her office, reading the tactical summary of 14 assembly ships forming a wall between the Prometheus and Earth, and felt the old, familiar fear settle over her, the same fear she had carried since the day the mining colony near Saturn had gone silent. This time, though, the fear sat beside something new. A quiet, steady confidence that had not existed 8 years earlier. They had built something real. Whatever happened next, humanity would not face it as it always had before, small and unarmed against a much larger power. She sent a short message back to Marcus, only a few words, but ones she meant with her whole heart. Trust the ship, trust your crew. We built this to win. Aboard the Prometheus, Marcus read the message twice before setting it aside, drawing a slow breath as the assembly formation grew larger on the main screen ahead of them. Around him, his crew continued their final preparations in the tense, focused quiet that came before any real battle, checking weapons, reinforcing shield settings, running last-minute diagnostics on systems that had never once been tested against a true enemy fleet. Whatever theories and simulations had shaped the last 8 years of work, none of it would matter as much as what happened in the next few hours. The Prometheus continued forward, unshaken, its massive engines burning steady and bright against the black of space, carrying humanity's newest and most powerful weapon directly toward the fleet that had, for over 2 decades, called them primitive. Fleet Marshal Cor Davin had commanded assembly warships for over 300 years. In that time, he had put down 3 separate rebellions, defeated a pirate confederation twice his fleet's size, and personally overseen the peaceful annexation of 6 minor species who had, wisely, chosen surrender over destruction. He was not a man who felt fear easily, but as he stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching sensor readings of a single human vessel approaching Earth's orbit, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time: uncertainty. "Run the scan again," he ordered his sensor officer, a younger Cygnian named Del Mero. There must be an error. Del ran the deep scan a 3rd time, and a 3rd time the results came back the same. The human vessel was massive, nearly 3 kilometers in length, larger than anything humanity had ever built before, larger even than most assembly capital ships. Its power signature alone was staggering, registering output levels that, according to every known model of human technology, should have been completely impossible. "No error, Fleet Marshal," Del said carefully. "The readings are consistent across all 3 scans." Cor studied the image on his main screen, the dark, heavy shape of the human ship growing slowly larger as it continued its approach. It did not look like anything the assembly's own shipyards would have designed. Where assembly warships were built for elegant efficiency, smooth curves and sleek lines meant to slip through space with minimal resistance, this human vessel looked almost crude by comparison, all thick plating and heavy angles, built more like a fortress than a proper warship. And yet something about its raw, brutal shape unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "Ambassador Vasca's report said this vessel appeared without warning," Cor said slowly. "How does a species we have monitored for over 2 decades build something like this without a single one of our observation posts noticing?" No one on the bridge had an answer for him. Cor thought back to the reports he had read over the years about Earth, dry summaries written by assembly analysts who visited the planet only rarely, and judged its people mostly by comparing their technology charts to standard growth curves seen in hundreds of other young species. Those reports had always described humanity in careful, measured language: promising, but undeveloped; resourceful, but limited by basic materials science; worth watching, but not worth serious concern for at least another century. Cor had never questioned those assessments. Why would he? The Assembly's analysts had been making these same kinds of judgments for over 200 years, across dozens of species, and they were rarely far from correct. He was beginning to understand, watching the massive human vessel approach on his sensors, that Earth might be the first real exception those analysts had ever encountered. Cor had 14 ships under his direct command in this sector, a mix of destroyers, light cruisers, and his own flagship, the heavy cruiser Vaston's Pride. Standard assembly doctrine called for overwhelming force against any unknown or hostile vessel, and 14 warships against a single target should have been more than sufficient under any normal circumstances. But these did not feel like normal circumstances. "Fleet Marshal," Del said, "the human vessel has not altered course or reduced speed since detection. It continues directly toward Earth's inner orbital zone." Cor straightened, pushing his uncertainty aside. Whatever this vessel was, whatever it could do, it was still a single ship against 14. The mathematics of war did not change simply because one side had a surprise. "Signal the fleet. Move to intercept formation. We will not allow this vessel to reach Earth's orbit unchallenged." Aboard the Prometheus, Marcus watched the same confrontation unfold from the opposite side. The assembly fleet had shifted into a clear intercept formation, 14 ships spreading into a wide arc, directly across the Prometheus's projected path. There would be no avoiding this meeting now, not without turning back entirely, and turning back was not an option Marcus was willing to consider. "Range to nearest assembly vessel?" he asked. 400,000 kilometers and closing, Tomas reported. "At current speed, we'll be within their effective weapons range in approximately 22 minutes. Marcus nodded slowly, running through the tactical situation in his mind. Assembly weapons typically had an effective combat range far shorter than the Prometheus's own railguns, a fact Amara's team had confirmed through years of careful observation and study of assembly ship designs. If that intelligence was correct, the Prometheus should be able to open fire and land damaging hits long before the assembly fleet came close enough to properly threaten them in return. Should be able to. Marcus was keenly aware that they were about to test years of theory and simulation against reality for the very first time, with the fate of an entire species riding on the results. "Priya," he said, turning toward the weapons station, "confirm railgun effective range against assembly shield configurations." Priya Nair checked her readings quickly, her hands steady now despite the growing tension on the bridge. Based on Dr. Osei's models, effective range should be approximately 600,000 kilometers against standard assembly shields, Captain. We should be able to open fire well before they're within range to properly hit us back. Good, Marcus said. Prep the forward railgun batteries. We open fire the moment we're in range, and we open fire hard. I want the first exchange of this engagement to leave absolutely no doubt about what this ship can do. A tense quiet settled over the bridge as the Prometheus continued its approach, the assembly fleet's arc formation growing steadily larger on the main view screen. Marcus found himself thinking, briefly, of everything that had led to this single moment: the mining colony near Saturn, the years of secret work at Forge Station, Amara's exhausted, determined face during countless late-night engineering reviews, Elena's quiet fury the day Ambassador Vasca had first called humanity an interesting young species. All of it had built toward this exact point in time. "Entering effective railgun range in 3 minutes, Tomas reported. "Steady," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm for the sake of his crew, even as his own heart pounded steadily faster in his chest. Aboard the Vaston's Pride, Fleet Marshal Cord Haven watched the human vessel continue its approach with growing unease. Standard assembly protocol called for a final warning before engagement, a formality more than anything, given how completely outmatched any single ship should have been against 14. He gave the order anyway. "Open a channel to the human vessel," he instructed. A moment later, the connection was established, and Kor addressed the approaching ship directly, his translated voice carrying the same calm authority he had used in 3 centuries of similar confrontations. "Human vessel, you are ordered to halt immediately and power down your weapons systems. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of war against the assembly." Marcus's response came back almost immediately, his voice steady and unhurried. "Fleet Marshal, this is Captain Marcus Cade, of the Earth Defense Fleet vessel Prometheus. We are returning to our home territory, and we will not halt. If the assembly wishes to avoid conflict, I would suggest your fleet withdraw from our path." Kor felt a flicker of something almost like admiration beneath his growing anger. The audacity of the response was, in its own way, impressive. But audacity did not win battles against 14 warships. "Then you leave us no choice," Kor said. "Fleet, prepare to engage on my mark." 3 minutes later, without further warning, the Prometheus opened fire. The first railgun volley tore across the gap between the two fleets faster than any assembly sensor could properly track. 4 massive projectiles launched from the Prometheus's forward battery, each one traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. They struck the nearest assembly destroyer almost simultaneously, punching straight through its shields as if they were not there at all, then straight through its hull, straight through its reactor core, and out the other side in a violent, silent explosion that tore the ship apart from the inside. On the bridge of the Vaston's Pride, the destruction happened so quickly that for a moment, no one fully understood what they had just witnessed. One moment, the destroyer Kello's Wing had been holding formation on their eastern flank. The next moment, it was simply gone, replaced by an expanding cloud of debris and superheated gas. "Status report," Kor demanded, his voice sharp with sudden alarm. "Kello's Wing is destroyed, Fleet Marshal," Dell reported, his voice shaking slightly. "Single hit. Their shields failed to register the impact at all, before catastrophic hull breach." Kor felt a cold weight settle in his chest. In 300 years of commanding warships, he had never seen a single weapon strike destroy an assembly destroyer so completely, so instantly. "Fire all weapons, bring that vessel down immediately." The assembly fleet opened fire in response, dozens of beam weapons lancing across the gap toward the Prometheus in a coordinated barrage. Aboard the human ship, the layered shield system built by Amara's engineering team absorbed the incoming fire, individual shield plates flaring bright and failing one by one under the concentrated assault, but never allowing a single beam to punch all the way through to the hull beneath. Shields holding at 81%, Yuki Tanaka reported from engineering, relief evident in her voice. Distributed shield array is working exactly as designed, Captain. We're absorbing hits far better than the simulations predicted. Continue firing, Marcus ordered, watching the tactical display as Priya's weapons team locked onto a second target, a light cruiser attempting to break away from the main formation. Target their cruisers first. Take out their heaviest hitters before they can properly coordinate. The second railgun volley found its mark just as devastatingly as the first, tearing through the light cruiser's shields and hull in a single strike that left the ship crippled and drifting, its reactor core venting plasma into open space. A third volley followed moments later, catching a destroyer, attempting to flank the Prometheus from behind, destroying it just as completely as the first. In less than 4 minutes of combat, the assembly fleet had lost 3 ships outright, with a fourth badly crippled and falling out of formation entirely. Core Daven stared at the tactical display in growing disbelief, watching numbers that made no sense against everything 300 years of military experience had taught him about warfare. Fleet Marshal, Dell said carefully, should we consider withdrawal? Core's first instinct was to refuse outright. 300 years of assembly doctrine did not include withdrawing from a single enemy vessel, no matter how unexpectedly powerful it proved to be. But 300 years of experience also taught him to recognize when a battle had already been decided by factors he did not fully understand. Continue the engagement, he said finally, though his voice carried less certainty than it had at the start of the battle. Concentrate all remaining fire on that single vessel. Overwhelm their shields with volume, if precision has failed us. The remaining 10 assembly ships shifted tactics, coordinating their fire into concentrated volleys aimed at single sections of the Prometheus's hull, attempting to overwhelm the layered shield system through sheer weight of fire rather than individual power. It was a smarter approach than their initial scattered barrage, and aboard the Prometheus, the effects became noticeable almost immediately. Shields down to 63%, Yuki reported, her voice tighter now. They've adjusted their targeting. Concentrated fire on our port side is stressing that section's shield plates faster than the rest of the array. Marcus studied the tactical display carefully. The assembly fleet's new coordinated approach was, he had to admit, a genuinely dangerous adjustment. If they continued concentrating fire on a single section long enough, they might eventually punch through, even against the Prometheus's distributed defenses. Helm, adjust our rotation, Marcus ordered. Keep our port side angled away from their main formation. Don't give them a stable target to concentrate on. The Prometheus began a slow, deliberate rotation, forcing the assembly fleet to constantly readjust their targeting as the ship's exposed sections shifted. It was a delicate maneuver for a vessel of the Prometheus's massive size, but the ship's helmsman, a steady, experienced officer named Chief Petty Officer David Osei, no relation to Amara despite the shared name, handled it with practiced precision. Meanwhile, Priya's weapons team continued their own methodical work, picking off assembly ships one at a time with devastating railgun strikes. A fifth assembly vessel, a destroyer, attempting to break formation entirely and retreat, was caught by a well-placed shot before it could escape the engagement zone, its hull cracking open in a burst of superheated gas and debris. Aboard the Vaston's Pride, Cordhaven watched his fleet slowly disintegrate around him, ship after ship falling to a single vessel that, by every measure the assembly understood, should not have existed. He thought, briefly, of the countless meetings where assembly diplomats had spoken confidently of humanity's primitive limitations, of the careful restrictions placed on what technology could be shared with Earth, all built on the assumption that humans posed no real threat and never would for generations to come. That assumption, Core now understood with growing horror, had been catastrophically wrong. Fleet Marshal, we've lost 5 ships, Dell reported, his voice barely steady. 3 more report critical shield failures. If this continues, I am aware of the numbers, Lieutenant, Core snapped, more sharply than he intended. He forced himself to think clearly, setting aside 300 years of assumptions about what a young species like humanity should be capable of. This was no longer a battle that could be won through simple weight of numbers. Continuing to press the engagement risked losing his entire remaining fleet for nothing. "Signal general withdrawal," Kor said finally, the words tasting bitter as he spoke them. "All ships disengage and retreat to rally point Theta immediately." Aboard the Prometheus, Tomas watched the assembly formation begin to break apart, individual ships peeling away from the main group and accelerating hard away from the battle zone. "Captain, they're retreating. All remaining assembly vessels are disengaging." A quiet cheer rippled briefly across the bridge before Marcus raised a hand, cutting it short. "Hold your positions. This isn't over yet, not by a long way. Track their withdrawal, but do not pursue. Let them go." "Captain?" Lisa asked, surprised. "We have the advantage. We could press further. Take out more of their fleet while they're vulnerable." Marcus shook his head slowly, watching the retreating assembly ships on the main screen. "We didn't build this ship to conquer anyone, Commander. We built it to make them respect us enough to leave us alone. Chasing down a retreating fleet sends the wrong message entirely. Let them return home and report exactly what happened here today. That message will do more for us than any amount of additional destruction." Lisa considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in it, even as adrenaline from the battle still ran high in her veins. "Understood, Captain." As the last of the assembly ships vanished from sensor range, retreating toward the edge of the solar system, the bridge crew of the Prometheus finally allowed themselves a collective breath of relief. They had done it. Against 14 assembly warships, against a species that had spent over 2 decades treating humanity as something small and unimportant, they had won, and won decisively, without losing a single life of their own. But Marcus, watching the empty space where the assembly fleet had been only minutes before, felt no real sense of celebration. He understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone else on the bridge, that this single battle, however decisive, was only the beginning of something much larger. The Assembly Council would not simply accept this defeat quietly. Somewhere out among the stars, word of what had happened here today was already beginning to spread, and the Assembly's response to that news would shape everything that came next for humanity. "Yuki, damage report," Marcus said, turning his attention to the practical matters of the aftermath. "Shield array took significant stress, but nothing critical," Yuki reported. "We'll need about 6 hours of repair work before we're back to full combat readiness, but the Helios core performed beautifully throughout the entire engagement." "Dr. Osei's designs held up exactly as promised, Captain." Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile at that. "Send word to Admiral Reyes. Tell her the Prometheus has arrived home, and tell her exactly what happened here today." He rose from the command chair and walked slowly around the bridge, stopping to speak briefly with each of his officers, thanking them for their steady work under pressure none of them had ever truly trained for in a real battle. Priya still sat at her station, her hands finally still after hours of tense, focused firing, staring at the empty space where the assembly fleet had been. "First real fight," Marcus said quietly, standing beside her. "How are you holding up?" Priya let out a long breath. "Honestly, Captain, I'm not sure yet. Ask me again tomorrow." "Fair enough," Marcus said, offering her a small, understanding nod before moving on. Aboard the ship, in mess halls and corridors and engineering bays, similar conversations were happening throughout the crew, people slowly processing what they had just lived through, some quietly proud, others simply relieved to still be breathing. War, Marcus understood, however necessary or justified, always left its mark on the people who fought it, and he made a private promise to himself that he would not let his crew forget the weight of what they had done here today, even as the wider public back on Earth would likely see only numbers and headlines. As the crew began the careful work of assessing damage and preparing reports, the Prometheus continued its slow, steady approach toward Earth's orbit, no longer hidden, no longer secret, its massive dark shape now visible to anyone on the planet below who cared to look up at the right moment. For the first time in over 2 decades, humanity had shown the assembly, and the wider galaxy beyond it, that being called primitive did not mean being powerless. But far beyond the edge of the solar system, aboard the battered remains of Fleet Marshal Kordtavin's fleet, a very different kind of message was already being prepared, one that would soon reach the highest levels of the Assembly Council itself, and set in motion a response far larger and far more dangerous than a single squadron of 14 ships. The Assembly Council chamber sat at the center of Serathis Prime, the ancient homeworld of the Cygnian species, and the political heart of the entire assembly. It was a massive circular room, built from pale stone quarried from the planet's deepest mountains, with seats arranged in rising rows around a central speaking platform. Representatives from over 30 member species sat in those seats on the day Fleet Marshal Cor Davin's report arrived, and by the time the full details had been read aloud, the chamber had fallen into a silence unlike anything most of the representatives had experienced in their long lives. High Counselor Mira Thesk, an elderly Cygnian who had led the Assembly Council for nearly 80 years, sat very still at the center of the platform, listening as the report was read a second time, as if repetition might somehow change its impossible contents. 14 warships sent to enforce a simple oversight order. 9 of them destroyed or crippled. A single human vessel, appearing from nowhere, defeating an assembly squadron so completely that Fleet Marshal Davin himself had been forced to order a full retreat. "This cannot be accurate," said Representative Kolvash, a broad-shouldered Torvani delegate, known for his blunt manner. "No young species builds a weapon capable of this in secret. Someone gave them this technology." "Our intelligence services found no evidence of outside assistance," replied Councillor Thesk, her voice carefully measured despite the tension clearly running beneath it. "Every indication suggests this vessel was designed and built entirely by human engineers, using methods and materials unlike anything in our own technology." A murmur of disbelief ran through the chamber. For over 2 centuries, the fundamental assumption underlying the Assembly's relationship with every young species it encountered had been simple. Technological development followed predictable patterns the Assembly understood better than the young species themselves. Species were guided carefully, given just enough knowledge to remain useful and cooperative, never enough to become a genuine threat. It was a system that had worked, without serious exception, for over 200 years. Humanity had just broken that system entirely. "Regardless of how they built it," said Representative Kolvash, "the fact remains, a member species, or a species we consider a client under our protection agreements, has directly attacked and destroyed Assembly warships. This cannot go unanswered. If we allow this to stand without serious consequence, every young species under our observation will see it as proof that resistance to Assembly guidance is possible, even successful." Several representatives around the chamber nodded in agreement, their expressions grim. Councillor Thesk understood the danger in Kolvash's argument, even as she disliked the direction it pointed. The Assembly's authority rested not just on its actual military strength, vast as it was, but on the perception of that strength among its dozens of member and client species. If that perception cracked, even slightly, the consequences could ripple outward for generations. "What do you propose, Representative Kolvash?" she asked. Kolvash rose from his seat, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the chamber floor. "A full punitive fleet, not 14 ships, not 50. I propose we send the 3rd Battle Fleet in its entirety, 200 vessels under Grand Admiral Veskareth, to humanity's home system. We make clear, beyond any possible doubt, exactly what happens to species who forget their place." The chamber erupted into heated debate at that proposal, representatives arguing loudly over each other, some supporting Kolvash's call for overwhelming force, others urging caution, given how badly the Assembly's assumptions about human capability had already proven wrong. Councillor Thesk let the debate run for several minutes before raising a hand for silence. A fleet of that size, sent against a single planet, would be seen throughout known space as an act of total war, she said carefully. If we are wrong about their capabilities a second time, the cost of failure grows considerably higher than a squadron of 14 ships. And if we hesitate, Kolvash countered, and humanity uses this delay to build more vessels, like the one that destroyed our fleet, what cost do we pay then? I would rather answer this threat while we still hold overwhelming advantage in numbers, however much their single ship has surprised us. In the end, after nearly 6 hours of continued debate, the Council reached a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but commanded enough support to pass. Grand Admiral Veskareth would lead a fleet of 80 warships, smaller than Kolvash's original proposal, but still overwhelmingly larger than anything humanity had ever faced, toward Earth's solar system. The stated purpose would be to enforce the original oversight agreement and demand the immediate surrender of the vessel, identified as the Prometheus, for full inspection. If humanity refused, Grand Admiral Kareth held full authority to use whatever force was necessary to bring the situation under control. Grand Admiral Ves Kareth was, by reputation, one of the most careful and disciplined commanders in the entire Assembly fleet, chosen for this mission, specifically because of his history of studying enemy tactics closely before ever committing to battle. Unlike Fleet Marshal Davin, who had approached the human vessel with the same confident assumptions that had shaped Assembly doctrine for 2 centuries, Kareth spent the 3 days before departure reviewing every scrap of sensor data recovered from the earlier engagement, searching for patterns, weaknesses, anything that might explain how a single vessel had defeated 14 Assembly warships so completely. He noted the human ship's reliance on long-range railgun weapons, its unusual distributed shield system, and its apparent preference for drawing enemy ships into tight, close formations, where its layered defenses could work most efficiently. By the time his fleet departed Cyrathus Prime, Kareth believed he understood the human vessel's core weaknesses well enough to avoid Davin's mistakes entirely. He did not yet understand that humanity had a second weapon prepared as well, one built not from steel and plasma, but from careful planning and the desperate courage of an entire fleet willing to risk everything for its home. Back on Earth, news of the coming fleet reached Admiral Elena Reyes through the same quiet diplomatic channels that had warned her of Ambassador Vasca's original ultimatum weeks earlier. She read the intelligence report twice, her expression darkening with each line. 80 ships. Against Earth's total defense fleet, still numbering fewer than 40 vessels even counting older, less capable ships, and a single, battle-tested Prometheus. She called an emergency meeting within the hour, gathering Marcus, Amara, Secretary Alvarez, and her senior fleet commanders in the secure command center beneath Earth Defense Fleet headquarters. The mood in the room was tense but not despairing. Word of the Prometheus's victory over Fleet Marshal Davin's squadron had, by now, spread through every level of Earth's military and government, and even as people absorbed the frightening news of an 80-ship response fleet, there was a new and unfamiliar sense of confidence running alongside the fear. 80 ships is a very different problem than 14, Marcus said, studying the intelligence report carefully. Even with the Prometheus's advantages, we cannot expect to fight that many ships alone and win cleanly. Agreed, Elena said, which means we don't fight this battle with the Prometheus alone. We fight it with everything we have. Amara looked up from her own datapad, where she had been running quick calculations since the meeting began. The Helios core technology in the Prometheus was always meant to be the first of its kind, not the only one. We've had a second and third reactor core in early production for the last year, meant for future vessels. They're not ready for full battleship installation, not in the time we have left. But, she paused, thinking quickly, we could potentially retrofit key systems from those cores into a handful of our existing fleet. Improved shields, at minimum. Possibly modest weapon upgrades if we push hard enough. How long? Elena asked. 6 days, working around the clock across every shipyard we have access to, Amara said. It won't turn our older ships into anything close to the Prometheus's equal, but it might be enough to let them survive longer in a real fight, and contribute meaningfully, instead of simply serving as targets. Do it, Elena said without hesitation. Every ship we can upgrade, every advantage we can find, we use every day we have left. Over the following 6 days, Earth's shipyards worked with an intensity unlike anything since the darkest days of the mining colony crisis, nearly a decade earlier. Amara split her limited engineering resources across a dozen different vessels, installing improved shield generators and modest weapon upgrades wherever the ship's existing systems could support the changes without a complete rebuild. It was imperfect, rushed work, and Amara knew better than anyone that these upgraded ships would still be badly outmatched by true assembly warships in a direct one-on-one confrontation. But every improvement mattered when the numbers were this lopsided. Marcus, meanwhile, spent those 6 days working closely with Elena and her senior commanders on the broader battle plan. The Prometheus alone could not realistically fight 80 assembly warships and expect to win outright, not even with its formidable railguns and layered shields. But the Prometheus did not need to win the battle alone. It needed to buy time, inflict heavy losses, and give Earth's remaining fleet enough opportunity to strike where the assembly formation was weakest. Their standard doctrine relies heavily on coordinated group tactics, Marcus explained during one planning session, pulling up detailed data collected from the earlier engagement against Fleet Marshal Davin's squadron. When Taven's ships adjusted to concentrated fire, it worked far better than their initial scattered approach. Grand Admiral Kareth will almost certainly use similar coordinated tactics from the very start this time, learning from Davin's mistakes. Then we need a plan that breaks their coordination early, Elena said. Marcus nodded, pulling up a tactical simulation on the main display. The Prometheus draws their main formation in, forces them to commit their heaviest firepower against a single target they believe they can eventually overwhelm through sheer numbers. While their attention is fixed on us, our remaining fleet, using Amara's improved shields to survive the opening exchanges, strikes their flanks and rear formation, targeting their support and command vessels specifically. If we can disrupt their central command structure early, their coordinated tactics fall apart, and individual assembly captains tend to fight far less effectively without clear central direction. It was a risky plan, one that depended heavily on the Prometheus, surviving sustained fire from the bulk of an 80-ship fleet, long enough for the rest of Earth's forces to find and exploit an opening. But it was, everyone in the room agreed, the best chance they had. 6 days after the Assembly Council's decision, Grand Admiral Ves Karath's fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system. Karath himself was a veteran commander, with a reputation for careful, methodical tactics rather than reckless aggression, chosen specifically by the Council for this mission, because of his ability to learn quickly from an enemy's demonstrated strengths. He had studied every available detail of Fleet Marshal Davin's disastrous engagement, and he had no intention of repeating the same mistakes. Aboard his flagship, the massive assembly dreadnought Voice of Order, Kareth addressed his assembled captains through a fleet-wide communication link, his voice calm and confident, despite the unusual nature of the mission ahead. We have studied the human vessel's tactics carefully. Its primary advantage lies in long-range railgun weapons and a distributed shield array that resists concentrated fire, far better than our standard doctrine anticipated. We will not repeat Fleet Marshal Davin's error of direct frontal engagement. Our fleet will approach in a wide dispersed formation, minimizing our exposure to their long-range weapons during approach, then close rapidly to engage at multiple angles simultaneously, overwhelming their shield array from directions it cannot efficiently defend against all at once. It was, Marcus had to admit, when Earth's intelligence services intercepted and translated the transmission, a genuinely smart adjustment to their earlier defeat. Grand Admiral Kareth had clearly done his research. The battle began 3 hours later, as the assembly fleet crossed into the outer edge of Earth's solar system, in the wide, dispersed formation Kareth had described. The Prometheus moved to intercept alone at first, exactly as planned, drawing the bulk of the assembly fleet's attention, while Earth's remaining 38 vessels, upgraded as best Amara's team could manage in the time available, held back in a carefully hidden formation behind the cover of the asteroid belt's outer edge, waiting for the right moment to strike. Assembly fleet entering long-range engagement distance, Tomas reported from the Prometheus's tactical station, his voice tight with focus. They're staying dispersed, Captain, just like the intercepted transmission said. They're not giving us an easy concentrated target. Marcus studied the tactical display carefully. 80 assembly ships spread across a wide arc, approaching from multiple angles rather than a single tight formation. It was going to make targeting far more difficult, and it meant the Prometheus's earlier tactic of picking off tightly grouped ships one by one would not work nearly as cleanly this time. Priya, target their largest ships first, regardless of formation spread, Marcus ordered. If we can take out their command and support vessels early, the rest of their fleet loses coordination, even in a dispersed approach. The Prometheus opened fire as the first assembly ships crossed into effective railgun range, and the battle that followed was immediately far more chaotic and dangerous than the earlier engagement against Fleet Marshal Taven's smaller squadron. With the assembly fleet spread wide across multiple angles, Marcus's crew found themselves constantly redirecting fire, trying to prioritize the most dangerous targets, while enemy fire began arriving from directions the Prometheus's rotating defense pattern struggled to fully account for. Shields down to 72% already, Yuki reported urgently. They're hitting us from too many angles at once, Captain. Our rotation pattern isn't compensating fast enough. Understood, Marcus said, forcing himself to stay calm despite the mounting pressure. David, adjust rotation pattern. Prioritize covering our most heavily targeted section, even if it means exposing less critical areas. The helmsman worked quickly, adjusting the Prometheus's massive bulk with practiced precision, buying precious extra minutes as the ship's shields continued absorbing punishing fire from all sides. Meanwhile, Priya's weapons team continued their methodical work, railgun volleys tearing through assembly ships one after another, destroying a cruiser here, crippling a destroyer there. But the sheer number of enemy vessels meant that for every ship destroyed, several more continued closing the distance, adding their own weapons fire to the growing assault. 20 minutes into the engagement, with the Prometheus's shields down to just under 40%, and assembly ships now close enough to begin threatening real hull damage, Marcus gave the signal that had been planned from the very beginning. Now's the time. Hidden behind the asteroid belt's outer edge, Elena Reyes had been watching the battle unfold, on remote sensor feeds with growing tension, waiting for exactly this moment. All ships, she ordered over the fleet-wide command channel, engage now. Target their flank and rear formations. Focus fire on anything resembling a command or support vessel. Earth's remaining 38 ships surged forward from their hidden position, catching the heavily engaged assembly fleet almost completely by surprise. With Grand Admiral Kareth's attention and the bulk of his fleet's firepower fully committed to the ongoing assault against the Prometheus, the sudden appearance of a second Earth force, striking from an unexpected angle, threw the carefully dispersed assembly formation into immediate confusion. Aboard the Voice of Order, Kareth watched with rising alarm, as reports of the new attack came flooding in. Redirect flank vessels to counter this second force immediately, he ordered. But even as the words left him, he understood the deeper problem. His fleet's dispersed formation, so effective at avoiding the Prometheus's long-range firepower during the approach, now left individual assembly ships isolated and vulnerable to Earth's smaller vessels striking in coordinated, concentrated groups. The battle that followed grew increasingly chaotic, assembly ships caught between continuing to press their advantage against the badly damaged but still fighting Prometheus, and turning to defend against Earth's smaller fleet, now tearing through their exposed flanks. Amara's rushed shield and weapon upgrades, imperfect as they were, proved just enough to let Earth's ships survive the opening exchanges and land damaging, sometimes decisive hits against assembly vessels caught off guard by resistance far stronger than anything their doctrine had prepared them for. Aboard the Prometheus, the strain of the engagement was becoming impossible to ignore. Fires had broken out in two lower sections of the ship, quickly brought under control by damage crews working under Yuki Tanaka's steady direction, but the constant, punishing fire from multiple angles had begun taking a real toll on both the ship and its crew. Marcus gripped the arms of his command chair as another volley of enemy fire rocked the bridge, sending a shower of sparks from an overloaded console near the back of the room. "Shields at 46%, Yuki reported, her voice strained but steady. "We're holding, Captain, but I won't lie to you. If this continues much longer, we're going to start losing sections we can't easily repair mid-battle." "Understood," Marcus said, forcing his own voice to remain calm for the sake of the crew around him. "Priya, how are we doing on their command ships?" "2 support vessels destroyed. 1 heavy cruiser badly damaged," Priya reported, her hands moving quickly across her console despite the visible exhaustion in her face. "Their coordination is already starting to break down, Captain. I don't think they expected us to hold this long." Marcus allowed himself a small, grim flicker of satisfaction at that, even as another explosion rocked the ship somewhere below decks. Whatever happened in the next several minutes would likely decide the entire battle, and every person on the bridge understood it without needing to be told. 2 hours into the engagement, with nearly a third of his fleet destroyed or crippled, and his remaining ships fighting in increasingly disorganized, isolated pockets across an expanding battle zone, Grand Admiral Ves Karath faced a decision that no amount of careful study of Fleet Marshal Davin's earlier defeat had fully prepared him for. Grand Admiral Ves Karath had commanded assembly fleets for over 400 years, longer than most species in the galaxy had even possessed working starships. In all that time, he had never once ordered a retreat from an engagement he had personally planned. Retreat was a word that belonged to weaker commanders, to lesser fleets, to species still learning the basic mathematics of war. It was not a word Kareth had ever expected to consider seriously. And yet, standing on the bridge of the Voice of Order, watching his carefully planned dispersed formation collapse into chaos under coordinated attacks from two directions at once. Kareth understood that the mathematics of this particular war had already changed in ways his 4 centuries of experience had not prepared him for. "Status report," he demanded, his voice tighter than he intended. Del Marrow, who had survived Fleet Marshal Davin's earlier defeat and been reassigned to Kareth's flagship as a sensor specialist with first-hand experience against the human vessel, answered with visible strain in his voice. 26 ships destroyed, Grand Admiral. 14 more critically damaged and unable to maintain effective combat capability. The human secondary fleet continues striking our flank and rear positions with concentrated fire, and their primary vessel, though heavily damaged, remains combat effective and continues engaging our main formation. Kareth studied the tactical display carefully, watching red markers representing destroyed and crippled assembly ships continuing to multiply across the battle zone. Nearly half his fleet, gone or effectively removed from the fight, in barely 2 hours of combat against a species his own council had confidently assured him posed no serious military threat. "The human primary vessel," Kareth said slowly. "Current status. Heavily damaged," Del reported. "Sensor readings suggest shield capacity below 15%, with visible hull damage across multiple sections. However, it continues firing effectively, and its weapons show no sign of reduced output despite the damage." Kareth weighed his options carefully. His remaining 38 ships still outnumbered Earth's combined remaining forces, and the Prometheus itself, whatever remarkable capabilities it had demonstrated, was clearly approaching the limits of what its damaged systems could withstand. A continued focused assault might yet destroy the human flagship and turn the tide of the entire engagement, but continuing meant risking his remaining fleet, as thoroughly as he had already lost the first half of it, against an enemy that had proven, twice now, capable of inflicting losses far beyond anything assembly doctrine had prepared for. And if he lost this fleet as completely as Fleet Marshal Davin had lost his smaller squadron, the political and military consequences for the assembly would be catastrophic, far beyond the loss of ships and lives alone. "Grand Admiral," Del said carefully, "if I may. The human secondary fleet's coordinated tactics suggest experienced central command, adapting quickly to our formation. Continuing this engagement risks losing the majority of our remaining strength for uncertain gain." Kareth was silent for a long moment, watching the battle continue to unfold on the display before him. Then, with the same careful, measured tone he had used for 4 centuries of military decisions, he gave the order he had never expected to give. "Signal general withdrawal. All remaining ships disengage and retreat to the outer system rally point. This engagement is concluded." Aboard the Prometheus, the crew watched with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief as the remaining assembly ships began pulling back from the battle, their formation breaking apart as individual vessels turned and accelerated away from the engagement zone. Marcus sat in the command chair, his uniform torn and singed from a small fire that had broken out near the bridge during the height of the assault, watching the retreating assembly fleet with a tired but genuine sense of relief. "Confirm their withdrawal," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of shouted commands during the worst of the fighting. "Confirmed, Captain," Tomas said, equally exhausted. "All remaining assembly vessels are retreating from the system. They're not looking back." The bridge erupted into quiet, exhausted celebration. Crew members who had spent the last 2 hours fighting for their lives and the future of their entire species, finally allowing themselves a moment to feel the weight of what they had accomplished. Marcus let it run for a minute before calling for quiet, his own relief tempered by the knowledge of just how close the battle had truly come to a very different outcome. "Yuki, full damage report," he said. "It's extensive, Captain," Yuki reported, her voice tired but steady. "Shield array is down to 12% effective capacity across the whole system. We've got hull breaches in 6 separate sections, though thankfully nothing that compromised critical systems. Helios core is still stable, but we pushed it well beyond its designed limits these last 2 hours. We're going to need serious repair time before this ship sees combat again." "Casualties?" Marcus asked, bracing himself for the answer. 23 wounded across the ship, Yuki said. "Serious injuries, but the medical team reports everyone is expected to survive. No fatalities, Captain." Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment, allowing himself to feel the full weight of relief that came with those words. He thought of Priya, still at her station, and Lisa, and David, and Yuki herself, and every other member of the crew who had trusted him to lead them through a battle none of them could have fully prepared for. He made his way slowly through the ship over the following hour, checking on the wounded in the medical bay, thanking damage control teams still working to stabilize the ship's systems, and standing quietly for a moment, beside the section of hull that had taken the worst of the fighting, now scorched and dented, but still holding strong. Whatever came next, he understood that this ship, and the people who had built and crewed it, had more than earned their place among the stars. Marcus closed his eyes briefly at that news, a wave of relief washing through him that he hadn't fully realized he needed until that moment. 23 wounded, against odds that could easily have cost hundreds of lives, or the entire ship itself, was as close to a miracle as he was willing to believe in. Across the wider battle, Earth's remaining fleet reported similarly serious but survivable losses. 6 ships destroyed outright, another 11 damaged badly enough to require extensive repair, and a total of 114 crew members killed across the fleet. A painful cost by any measure, but one that paled in comparison to what might have happened had the Prometheus and Amara's rushed upgrades not held as well as they did against an 80-ship assembly fleet. Elena Reyes received the full battle reports within the hour, reading through casualty numbers and damage assessments with the same careful attention she had given every report throughout the 8 long years of Project Ember. When she finished, she sat quietly for a long moment in her office, thinking of the mining colony near Saturn, the 61 crew members lost on that first destroyed warship years ago, and the long, difficult path that had led from that single tragedy to this moment. They had won. Against overwhelming numbers, against a species that had spent over 2 decades treating humanity as something small and manageable, they had won, and won decisively enough that the Assembly's confident assumptions about human capability would never again go unquestioned. But Elena understood, just as Marcus had understood after the first engagement against Fleet Marshal Davin's squadron, that military victory alone would not determine what came next. The true battle, the one that would decide humanity's long-term future among the stars, was only beginning, and it would be fought in council chambers and negotiation rooms rather than open space. News of Grand Admiral Karath's defeat reached the Assembly Council chamber on Serathis Prime 3 days later, and this time, the silence that followed was even heavier than after Fleet Marshal Taven's initial report. 80 ships sent, 40 destroyed or crippled beyond repair. A punitive fleet, carefully planned to overwhelm and correct a single upstart species, had instead suffered one of the most significant military defeats in Assembly history in living memory. High Counselor Mira Thesk sat quietly at the center of the platform, as the full report was read aloud, watching the reactions ripple across the chamber's rising rows of seats. Representative Kolvash, who had originally argued for an even larger punitive fleet, sat in uncharacteristic silence, his earlier confidence visibly shaken by numbers that defied every assumption his argument had rested upon. "This changes everything," Thesk said finally, once the report had been fully read. "We can no longer treat humanity as a client species, requiring correction and guidance. Whatever we believed about their capabilities before, whatever careful restrictions we placed on their development, none of it reflects the reality we now face." "Then what do you propose, Counselor?" asked a different representative, a slender, silver-scaled Vantrian delegate named Saris Kale, who had remained largely quiet through both previous debates. "Continued military action has now failed twice, at significant cost. Further escalation risks losses the Assembly may struggle to recover from, particularly if other client species take note of our repeated failures and grow bold in their own ambitions." Thesk considered this carefully. Saris Kale's concern echoed the same fear that had shaped much of the Council's original caution regarding humanity's growing independence. Not fear of humanity itself, but fear of what humanity's example might inspire in dozens of other young species scattered across Assembly territory, all watching carefully to see how their own futures might unfold. "I propose we do what we should perhaps have done from the very beginning," Thesk said finally. "We approach humanity, not as a client species requiring correction, but as an emerging power, requiring genuine negotiation. We offer full diplomatic recognition, an end to the restrictive trade agreements that have limited their development, and an invitation to formal membership within the Assembly as an equal, rather than a subordinate." The chamber erupted into renewed debate at that proposal, though this time the arguments carried a different weight than before. Representative Kolvash, still visibly shaken by the scale of Karath's defeat, offered only muted objections. His earlier confidence in easy military solutions, clearly broken by 2 consecutive, decisive failures. By the end of the day's long session, the council voted, by a solid though not unanimous margin, to send a formal diplomatic delegation to Earth, carrying an offer far different from anything Ambassador Vaska had proposed weeks earlier. Ambassador Threl Vaska himself, humbled by the dramatic collapse of his earlier confident predictions about humanity's proper place within the Assembly's careful hierarchy, was chosen to lead the new delegation, a decision the Council hoped might carry some symbolic weight, given his earlier, more dismissive interactions with Earth's leadership. 2 weeks after the battle, Vaska's delegation ship arrived quietly in Earth's orbit, escorted by only a single unarmed transport, rather than the intimidating warship formation that had accompanied his earlier visits. Elena Reyes, along with Secretary Alvarez and a small group of Earth's senior diplomatic staff, met the delegation in the same negotiation room where Vaska had once delivered his confident ultimatum about Assembly oversight. This time, Vaska's manner was noticeably different, careful and measured in a way that had not been present during their earlier meetings. "Admiral Reyes," he began, his translated voice lacking the faint edge of condescension that had colored his earlier conversations. "The Assembly Council has authorized me to extend a formal offer of recognition and partnership to your species, on terms considerably different from those previously proposed." Elena listened carefully as Vaska outlined the new agreement: full diplomatic recognition of Earth as a sovereign power, an end to the restrictive limits on human access to advanced technology and trade, and a formal invitation for humanity to join the Assembly as a full, equal member, rather than a carefully managed client species. It was, in every meaningful way, exactly what humanity had spent over 2 decades being denied. "And the oversight fleet?" Elena asked carefully. "The restrictions on our shipyards, our military development?" "Withdrawn entirely," Vaska said. "The Council recognizes that humanity has demonstrated, beyond any reasonable doubt, the capability to develop and manage its own military affairs responsibly. Continued oversight would serve no meaningful purpose, beyond causing unnecessary friction between our peoples." Elena studied Vaska carefully, remembering the smiling ambassador who had once called humanity an interesting young species, meaning it as an insult, years before any of this had begun. There was no trace of that smile now, only careful, measured respect, hard-won through cost, that Elena understood, better than almost anyone, had not come cheaply. "The Assembly Council also wishes to formally acknowledge," Vaska continued, "the skill and courage demonstrated by the crew of the vessel Prometheus, and by the broader Earth Defense Fleet, during recent engagements. It is, I believe, an important step toward rebuilding trust between our peoples, however difficult that path may prove." Elena nodded slowly, considering the offer carefully before responding. "Earth will consider this proposal seriously, Ambassador, but I think it's important you understand something clearly, for your Council's benefit going forward. We never wanted conflict with the Assembly. Every step of Project Ember, every year of secret work that led to the Prometheus, was driven by a simple desire to no longer be treated as something small and manageable. We are not seeking to challenge the Assembly's place among the stars. We are simply asking to stand as equals, rather than subjects." Vaska was quiet for a long moment, his narrow eyes studying Elena carefully. "I understand that now, Admiral, perhaps more clearly than I did during our earlier meetings. I hope, for both our people's sake, that this new arrangement reflects that understanding going forward." The formal treaty between Earth and the Assembly was signed 3 weeks later, in a ceremony broadcast across every major network on the planet. For the first time, the full story of Project Ember and the Prometheus was revealed to the public, and the response across Earth was overwhelming. People who had spent over 2 decades quietly resenting the Assembly's careful, condescending restrictions finally understood the full scale of what had been happening behind closed doors, and the price that had been paid, in years of secret work, and finally in lives lost during the battle itself, to secure humanity's rightful place among the stars. Marcus Cade stood beside Elena Reyes during the signing ceremony, the Prometheus visible in orbit above them on the massive display screens set up across the ceremony grounds, its battle damage now fully repaired, its dark hull gleaming under the sunlight in a way that made it look, for the first time, almost beautiful rather than simply brutal. "You did it," Elena said quietly, watching the ship on the screen. "Everything we set out to do, 8 years ago." "We did it," Marcus corrected gently. "You, me, Amara, and every single person who worked on this project, without ever fully knowing what they were building, or why it mattered so much." This was never one person's victory. Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile at that, watching the crowds gathered below the ceremony platform, people from every corner of Earth, celebrating a moment that would be remembered for generations to come. "What happens now, do you think, now that we're finally being treated as equals?" Marcus considered the question carefully, thinking of Amara already working on plans for a second and third Prometheus-class vessel, of Priya Nair training a new generation of weapons officers who would never have to fight the kind of desperate, uncertain battle their predecessors had faced, of an entire species finally stepping out from beneath decades of careful, condescending limitation. Nearby, Amara Osei stood quietly among a small group of engineers who had worked with her through the long, difficult years of Project Ember, many of them now able, for the first time, to speak openly about the work that had consumed so much of their lives in secret. A young reporter approached her carefully, asking what it felt like to see her designs finally recognized by the whole world. Amara considered the question for a moment before answering. "It feels like the beginning of something, not the end," she said. "We built one ship to prove a point. Now we get to build a future worth being proud of, out in the open, without having to hide what we're capable of." Elsewhere in the crowd, Priya Nair stood beside several other members of the Prometheus's crew, all of them still adjusting to the strange experience of being publicly recognized after months of quiet, dangerous work. A group of young students, no older than 12 or 13, approached her shyly, asking what it had been like to fire the weapons that had turned the tide of the battle. Priya knelt down slightly to meet their eyes and smiled. "It was frightening," she admitted honestly. "But I wasn't alone. None of us were. That's the only reason any of it worked." "Now," Marcus said finally, "we find out what humanity can really become, once nobody's holding us back anymore." Far above them, the Prometheus continued its slow, steady orbit around the planet it had been built to protect, a symbol no longer of secrecy and fear, but of what a species could accomplish when pushed to its absolute limits, and refusing, against every discouraging word and every confident prediction of failure, to accept a smaller future than the one it believed it deserved. The Assembly Council, in the weeks and months that followed, would come to understand something that Fleet Marshal Cordhaven had first realized during those chaotic, disbelieving minutes aboard the Vaston's Pride, watching his confident assumptions collapse against an enemy he had never truly understood. That being called primitive, being underestimated and dismissed by those who believed themselves naturally superior, had never made humanity weak. It had simply made humanity patient, determined to prove, in its own time and on its own terms, exactly what it was truly capable of. And across the wider galaxy, as word of Earth's remarkable rise spread quietly among dozens of other young species, still living under the Assembly's careful, restrictive guidance, a new kind of hope began to take root. The quiet understanding that even the oldest, most confident powers in the galaxy could be surprised, challenged, and ultimately forced to change by a species determined enough to build its own future, one difficult, hard-won victory at a time.